Hello, and welcome to Tech Latest by Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. Every episode, one of our reporters from the region will be filling us in on the tech news on their radar, from semiconductors in China to space travel in Japan to startups in Indonesia. From Nikkei Asia's Tokyo headquarters, I'm Alice French. In this episode, I'm talking to Akito Tanaka, our senior business news correspondent based in Singapore, about how and why US big tech is still reliant on the Chinese market despite decoupling efforts. Hi, Akito. Thanks for coming on to chat today.
Hey, Alice. Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to pick your brains about our cover story this week, which you authored. It's a deep dive into US tech companies' so-called China addiction. And the idea originated from a trend that you noticed in some revenue data, right? Can you tell us a bit about how this story came about and what your data findings were?
Yes, sure. So I thought of this story idea when I saw Tesla's earnings some quarters back. The company is selling a lot of EVs in China, and the revenue is growing astonishingly in the market, making them more and more dependent on the Chinese market, while the tension between the US and China is actually getting worse. So I thought, which American company makes the most money in China, and what does their dependency on the Chinese market look like? We've done a lot of stories on supply chain dependency, but this story could look into China as a market, which sounded like an interesting story idea. Now, the problem is that not every company releases a China figure like Tesla does. So we had to go to many data sets and finally found one data, which we published in this story. So please read it if you haven't. And the data was quite surprising and was sort of beyond my initial thoughts. Now, the data showed that many US tech companies were in the top 100 global companies earning revenues in China. In fact, there were 17, and Apple being number one. And there was Tesla, Qualcomm, and all these major tech companies were highly concentrated, and they're making a lot of money in China. And then we took a deeper look at other data, such as company filings, and found out that these dependencies or China addiction, as you said, haven't changed much since 2018, when the US and China's relationship, especially on the tech-related issues, became a serious international problems.
Right, and like you say, it's actually pretty astonishing how little of a dent the US-China tech war seems to have had on these tech companies' operations in China. I mean, in some cases, even the China dependence has increased over time, right? Why are these companies still so reliant on China for their revenue? And what is it about the Chinese market that makes it just so hard to quit?
I mean, obviously, China is the second largest economy in the world after the United States. And for companies that sell products there, this would be companies like Apple and Tesla, and they have been investing a lot there. China has the second biggest number of Apple stores after the US. And for Tesla, China is the biggest EV market in the world. So it all makes perfect sense for these companies to do well in China until the US-China tech confrontation became an issue. Now, one university professor said that these high-tech firms, they can't live without the Chinese market.
Right, and you can read more of those kind of arguments in the full story. But as your piece points out, the tech leaders, that they're by no means unaware of the risks that come with being too dependent on one country for business, particularly in the current geopolitical climate. What kind of steps is US big tech taking to try and mitigate those risks?
Yes, so Apple and others are looking into new markets, such as India, and this is for both sales opportunities and manufacturing capabilities, right? Now, manufacturing in China is also very important here because companies such as Apple and others have a very high concentration of manufacturing capabilities in China. Therefore, US semiconductors, they have to sell their products in China, making them also dependent on Chinese market. Now, one analyst in the story mentioned that with this mitigation plan for looking at different regions like India and Vietnam, could potentially remove about 1/3 of the electronic manufacturing capabilities from China out from China. But I mean, obviously, 2/3 will remain. And this shift, according to this analyst, he says that it will take about 4 to 5 years. So they are trying, but it won't happen anytime soon.
Now, having been working on this story for a couple of months now, I know this story has been a while in the making. What's your personal takeaway from this piece? Do you get the impression that American tech leaders are willing or ready to make the move away from China? And how do they feel about the US government's ongoing crackdown?
Yes. So what was really interesting working on this story was that literally while I was drafting the article, the U.S. tech leaders suddenly started visiting China or Beijing. So Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, he was there to meet with China's President Xi Jinping last month. Elon Musk, Tesla CEO, he went there in May. Apple CEO Tim Cook was there in March, and Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger was there in April. And these are all the companies that I mentioned in the article. So the story really developed while we were working on it. Now, what this means is that all these big tech executives in the US, they want to keep connection and keep on doing business in China. Now, many executives I've interviewed in the past for this story and for other articles as well. For example, IBM CEO Arvind Krishna and Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, they both said that they want the rules to be doing business in China more clear. So it will be very interesting to see how this further develops, because if the U.S. government keeps on escalating the China restrictions, the effect may actually hurt their most important industry, which is tech. It's a huge and very important developing topic, and Nikkei Asia will continue to cover the issue.
Before we go, are there any other tech-related stories you'd like to recommend to the listeners this week?
Yes, so the other story I picked is related to the topic we just talked about, and it's a report from Shanghai about US tech companies attending a major AI-related conference that was held in China. So please look at the story with the China dependency story, because it would add depth of what's happening. The headline of this story is Musk, Microsoft, and more drawn to China's AI opportunities. And this is written by Tomoko Wakasugi and Shunsuke Tabeta. And another is Netflix looking into Asian market to strengthen their content offering. It's also an interesting piece, so please read this as well. And the headline of this article is Netflix hunts for next big hit in South Korea, Japan, and India.
Great. Thanks so much, Akito. And I hope that we can chat again soon.
Yes, thank you, Alice.
That's all for this episode. You can read more of Akito's reporting, along with a host of other stories about Asia's tech industry, on Nikkei Asia's website, asia.nikkei.com. And if you like what you hear, why not subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. There's a link to sign up in the show notes. And check back in next time for more updates on the tech trends that matter.